Hi, everyone. I'm Caius Tenchi, director of the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival. Thank you for joining me on this special edition of TMFF Talks. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with Bobby Haas, who's the founder of the Haas Moto Museum in Dallas and the executive producer of Leaving Tracks, the film that we released last week. I hope you got a chance to see it. If not, please stay tuned to this talk session. I think it's going to be great, a lot of fun. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Bobby Haas. So as I mentioned, let me give you his background. He started off as a financier, then changed careers and became a National Geographic published photographer. Then at 64, he got into motorcycling and not only got into it, but like both feet into it and built what is arguably one of the finest motorcycle museums in the world, Haas Moto Museum. He is a filmmaker and most recently a DGR 2021 Global Ambassador, one of 10, I believe. So let's bring Bobby online. Hi, Bobby. Welcome.
Thank you, Caius. It's absolutely a delight to be here with you.
It is my pleasure. Did I get all of that right, Bobby?
I think you got it all right. It sounds like I have a good future behind me.
That is a lot of career changes, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit. It's also really interesting. I love that you've taken these passions and really went for them. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking, as DGR, one of the 10 DGR 2021 Global Ambassadors, how was DGR for you? How did it go?
DGR was simply fabulous, both on a local level. The Dallas turnout was fantastic. We've worked with DGR here in Dallas for 3 or 4 years now. The local people are great promoters of the cause. And on an international level, working with Mark Hawa, the head of DGR, the founder of DGR, and with the other 9 ambassadors. I was honored to be one of 10. And the success in terms of fundraising, the number of riders, the number of cities, just has totally exceeded everyone's expectations. It was a great event, a great lead up to the event, and the fundraising has been spectacular.
Amazing. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to all get together to do group rides on DGR like we have in previous years, but I'm glad that the event still continued. It's interesting. I was thinking when I was planning for this interview that it's so timely that we're doing this right around DGR, because obviously DGR has got a huge mental health well-being component to it. And your film, Leaving Tracks, definitely has a lot of emotional and well-being. I don't know if mental health is the right term for it, but there's definitely some parts where you're dealing with trauma and anguish, things that you're overcoming. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that there is a tremendous compatibility between the film, Leaving Tracks, and what transpired with DGR. And in the speech that I was asked to give to all the participants in Dallas, I mentioned that DGR is really the personification or the amplification of the film, in the sense that as soon as the riders left the facility that we were in, they were leaving tracks in the same 2 ways that the film Leaving Tracks is meant to represent. Number one, they're leaving tracks on the street as they ride. But the other thing that they're doing is they're leaving tracks in terms of a residue, a reward, if you will, a gift to the world, because they're leaving tracks in the sense that the riders who are going out there are literally saving lives. They don't know whose life they're saving, whether it's from depression or from prostate cancer or whatever, but the cause that they are part of is a cause that will result in men saving lives throughout the world. And I think in that sense, it was a mirror image in live action of what the film was all about.
Thank you, Bobby. So, should we jump right into how you got into motorcyclings? Part of it, I want to ask you about your careers prior to that, in particular, how you moved from finance to Nat Geo. But I want to jump right into the bikes. So I started my passion for motorcycling in my late 40s. It was like a light switch for me. Um, and I find a lot of people actually are coming into it at a later on in their life. But you came into it at 64, if I remember correctly. How did that come about? And like, what happened for you? What triggered that aha moment when you said, I want to get a motorcycle?
You're right. That aha moment occurred almost exactly 10 years ago to the day, because there was an article in the New York Times on May 28th or 29th, 2011, about the Ural sidecar motorcycle. And the title of the article was that it was a retro Russian sidecar for older, easier riders. By the time I was 64, I was older and ready to be an easier rider. But part of the reason I jumped at the opportunity to acquire a Ural was the fact that I had just finished a 10-year stint with National Geographic of being an aerial photographer and hanging out of helicopters with the doors off all over the world in very remote spots in Africa, Latin America, the Arctic, which is thrilling, but it's also very dangerous. And I was privileged to be one of their photographers. I was privileged to publish the first 3 aerial books that Nat Geo had ever published in their history. And we finished the trilogy of 3 books after after actually a decade. And then the aftermath was another year or two of the marketing. And I miss the danger, frankly. I miss the thrill. I miss the motion. I miss the wind in my face. And I thought, I'm not designed to be a fisherman. And frankly, I thought, well, I didn't fall out of the helicopter and I've been doing it for 10 years. So let's get on the back of a motorcycle. I've always been fascinated by motorcycles. Let's try it. And when I saw that the Ural, the one the article was about, was a 3-wheeled motorcycle, I thought, well, this must be easier. It's like a tricycle. And it's anything but. If anybody out there has ridden a sidecar, it's a fairly dangerous way to go out on the streets. But I tried it, and it worked out. And after I was on the Ural for a while, took a couple of road trips, and decided to graduate up to Harleys, put a sidecar on Harleys. And at that point, I was pretty well hooked, although the heavy octane of being hooked on motorcycles occurred when I was embedded in a moto gang for purposes of writing a book about gang life. And it was a gang of all veterans, all war veterans from around the world. And that combination of the riding and the lifestyle associated with being a biker was enough to permanently hook me. Then I started to acquire a few motorcycles and a few more, and it is a passion that becomes an addiction for which there's no cure.
Yeah, that's so true. Let me just interject and say, if anyone that is watching has a question for Bobby, or a comment about the film, or maybe you visited his museum, please type your question into the chat box on YouTube or Facebook, and then we will put it up on screen, and Bobby can help answer it. Okay, Bobby, so you got your Ural, you got a Harley, and then you were embedded with this group of motorcycle veterans, and you started picking up some additional bikes. What timeline are we talking about? Is that like 1 year, 2 year, 3 years?
Well, I acquired the Ural in 2011, and I acquired a few more vintage cycles in the 2012, 13, 14 period. including a few custom cycles. And I was stuffing those onto the top floor of the investment firm where I was chairman. And eventually we ran out of space, or my partners ran out of patience. And I decided to build a motorcycle gallery here in Dallas in the design district. And that was a gallery that opened in 2016. So we started to build it in 2015. It opened in 2016. And it had a capacity, it was 5,000 square feet. It had a capacity of about 60 or so motorcycles. And once I got past 60, my appetite for collecting and commissioning custom builds was not satisfied. And we knew we needed a larger facility. And when I say we, I mean a combination of two people, myself and Stacy Mayfield, who was my right arm person, my left arm person, every appendage you can think of. She was part of this journey. And Stacy is now the director and the chief operating officer of the museum. And together we built a 20,000 square foot facility. We broke ground in 2017. It opened in April of 2018. The collection at that point was about 150, 160. And it continued to build up to the present day where it's 230. And the number of custom cycles is in the 60s, around 70. And that represents the largest custom collection ever assembled.
That's unbelievable. Like the pace that you acquired or commissioned these bikes is staggering. I'm trying to still understand what you were thinking or feeling as you were before you opened the first museum of about 1,000 square feet, when you were just stacking the bikes into your office. You started, I'm imagining, correct me where I'm wrong here, I'm imagining you just started acquiring bikes that you liked. Maybe, oh, this is a nice vintage bike, I like that, and it might have some historical value, or at least not necessarily monetary value, but a value because it connected with you in some way.
Right.
And then there was like, oh, there's another bike, and oh, there's another bike. Like, and at some point, you might, that idea that maybe I should start a museum, and then to turn that into the 20,000 square foot Haas Moto Museum, like that's not a small incremental, trajectory, right? That's like we're moving along and then boom, we're doing something massive. We're going to go all in. We're going to do it right. It's amazing, honestly. So I want to ask you what you were thinking. And then as a part two to that, how do you keep pace of acquiring 230 motorcycles over the span of a very short window? Like that's like a new bike every other week sort of thing.
Yeah, the pace actually was on the average of one bike per week, which was a combination of vintage acquisitions and custom commissions coming to fruition. You're exactly right. I think when I was acquiring a handful of vintage bikes or commissioning one or two custom bikes for the top floor of the investment firm, it was more in the nature of just being an avid collector, a passion, a hobby, if you will. Once we outgrew that space, I said, I really am fascinated by this. I'm beginning to get the same sense I had as a photographer for National Geographic. There's something about this that is tugging at me, and the artist in me is not in a coma. The artist in me is awakening to this new art form, if you will, of collecting and curating and so forth. Once we began to fill the Dragon facility, the Haas Motorcycle Gallery at Dragon, the 5,000 square foot facility, and a number of people from the Moto industry saw the facility, and started to tell us, we haven't seen a place like this. We haven't seen the number of custom cycles and the prominence of the custom builders that you've attracted. So this is really something. At that point, I turned to Stacy and I said, if we're going to expand beyond this, let's really go big. And let's try to build the finest moto museum in the world per square foot. Now, that's a brash statement. That's some people might say that's an arrogant statement, but it was very similar to the way I approach my photography with National Geographic. If we're going to do an aerial canvas of Africa from the air, let's make it the best one that's ever been done. There hasn't been one done of the Arctic. Let's do that, even though it takes us 4 years to do it. Let's run where nobody else has run. Let's do something nobody else has done, because that's what expands the boundaries of the industry. So when we broke ground, or we really had our first meeting with the architect, the designer, the builders, Stacy, myself, for the museum, I started off with a very brash statement, and I said, we're going to build the finest moto museum in the world per square foot. And anybody who doesn't believe in that vision, please leave the room, because I only want believers in the room. Nobody left the room. We had worked with the same over the hill gang on the Dragon Gallery, and then we accelerated the pace, but without diminishing the quality of what we were acquiring. And we already had a good number of dealers in Europe who knew that we wanted the most unusual cycles. We didn't want to have 8 Vincents and 7 Brough Superiors. Those are wonderful, but 1 Brough is fine and 1 Vincent is fine. Let's find some cycles so that when somebody walks in the museum, they see many cycles they've never seen before, even if they're moto aficionados. And as we were expanding, I thought to myself, every museum, every photographer, every artist needs to have a specialty that distinguishes that venue from any other venue. So when somebody comes inside the museum, they're going to see the finest fill in the blank. And I thought, as I became more fascinated with the custom side of the industry, that the opportunity existed for us to have the finest custom collection and the largest custom collection that has ever been assembled. And let that be the magnet. Let that be the drawing card. And one of the reasons I thought of the custom side as the drawing card is, even if you look at a Harley from the early 1900s, the first Harley was a custom cycle. There
Right.
wasn't an assembly line. The first Indian was a custom cycle. There wasn't an assembly line. So I thought the custom builders offer us an opportunity to distinguish ourselves and to expand the frontiers of the industry. And that's why we began to specialize in that.
So it seems like you have this ability to really hone in on a niche, something that's missing from somewhere else, and then you take a step, but it's a bold step. And especially with the construction of the museum and the acquisition of bike, that's a significant commitment in time and obviously finances. Was there any trepidation, any worries or concerns about taking that step?
Well, there definitely were worries and trepidations and concerns, and there's always the fear of failure. Anytime you step out into blank space, if you will. But I've always said that I think more people succeed by virtue of the fear of failure than anything else. And more people fail because they get infatuated with the success of something. And I think the fear of failure is something that spurs you on. It's like saying, I'm going to put myself at risk here, because I've been fortunate enough to have a successful finance career. It's given me the flexibility. It's given me the currency to utilize in ways that put myself at risk without putting at risk whether I can eat that night. And that was certainly true with the career with National Geographic. and doing aerial projects that nobody else had ever done, and hanging out of helicopters over icebergs and things like that. But the same was true being embedded with a moto gang, guys going 95 miles an hour, and the fastest I've ever gone is 65. There is risk. There is the thrill of the risk. And there's a great Australian author, Tim Winton, who talks about the cold scorch of fear, that you need to feel the cold scorch of fear in your throat in order to feel truly alive.
Mm.
That can be a physical fear. It can be a fear of failure. It can be a fear of falling down, flopping on your face. And I think, we all do things like that. When you have a child, you bring a child into this world. You can't bring a child into this world without trepidation of what you're about to do. So I think that fear is, in some sense, the coal that drives the engine. It pushes you forward. If it gets too easy, if it gets too automatic, if too many people have done it, it just isn't as interesting anymore.
Very true. Very true. Thank you for that. I want to move our discussion to the process of commissioning some of the custom builds, and then relationships that you've formed with some of the builders. But before we go there, I want to take just a couple of questions from our audience. So here's a question from Paolo. Does the motorcycle gang, I guess the veteran motorcycle gang, refer to themselves as a gang?
It's interesting because the word gang is synonymous amongst the various clubs, if you will, with the word club. This quote unquote gang, the organization that I was embedded with, was composed exclusively of veterans. And as part of their charter, the club or gang agreed that the members would not engage in criminal activities. So that this was not a gang that involved the dealing of drugs or protection money or prostitution or anything of that nature. It was basically formed the way the very early motorcycle gangs were formed in the 1940s after World War II. There was a huge supply of surplus motorcycles that the Army had from the war. And guys, veterans, were buying these cycles for a few $100s each, and then they banded together because they missed the camaraderie of their brothers in wartime. And that's the way a lot of the motorcycle gangs, if you will, were formed. And this particular one was really a carbon copy of those early days. They were all veterans, as far back as the Vietnam War and as recently as the Afghanistan War. So the word gang was used, or club, but usually gang, but it did not necessarily refer to a Hells Angels type of thing, or a Scorpions or a Banditos type of thing, where you are comparing yourself with the one percenters being ones who often engage in those activities. So it was, and I didn't see any of that. We had a few difficult situations that while I was embedded, but none of them involved criminal activity.
Okay. And the next question that we have from Steve sounds like a life well experienced. How did you go from finance to wildlife photography? Did you have a prior interest in photography? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. No, I had no prior experience in photography. In fact, I didn't own a camera, and I bought a camera from a little specialty shop here. I said, give me one that is foolproof. I'm going to Africa for the first time. This is in the early 90s. I said, I just want to point and shoot. And by the way, which is the shutter button? He said, it's that little circular thing over there. And I said, okay. And I got hooked up with a professional photographer who became a lifelong friend. He and I are still very, very dear friends. We email to each other every few days. And we just went out about 3-4 times a year in Africa. And I watched him. He never gave me any formal lessons. I just watched him. We were in the same safari Jeep together. And then one day he said, hey, you want to take a flip being an aerial flip, and we'll rent a helicopter, take the doors off, and go up for a few hours. And I found that once I was in the helicopter, even though I have acrophobia, I'm afraid of heights, took the doors off, and all of a sudden, my eye and my brain and my hands were functioning the way they should. Whereas on the ground, I thought, I'm imitating a good photographer, but I'm not a good photographer. In the air, I just felt this is where I belong. And I literally did not have a ground based safari trip or photographic trip for the next 10 years. Everything after that was either helicopters or light planes. And eventually, my work came to the attention of someone at National Geographic. He saw some of my work and he said, I think you should come back and make a presentation to Chris Johns, who was the worldwide head of photography, because we could do something together. And I did, and that led to a series of 5 books. So I basically took a shortcut into National Geographic. Many people work 20, 30, 40 years or never to get one photograph published by National Geographic. I was very fortunate in that the frontier of aerial photography, and this was pre-drone, was just that. It was a frontier. There were very few aerial photographers in the 90s and early 2000s who were going over these remote lands, and it represented for Nat Geo almost like the discovery that came with the explorers of the Arctic and Antarctica. So they jumped on this, and then our first couple books were bestsellers, and we just kept going for 10 years.
Bobby, did you always have this creative part of you? Because when one typically thinks of a finance person, the word creative doesn't really match with that.
That's an excellent question. The answer to the question in terms of did I always have a side of me that longed to be creative, whether I was good at it or not? The answer is yes. I like to write. I like to draw. I like to write poetry. I like to write stories. I liked creating, whatever that might be. Ironically, I think even in finance, it's not that what we were doing was not buying stock on Tuesday and selling stock on Wednesday. We were trying to figure out ways to buy companies that had never been combined before. For example, nobody had tried to combine all of the second tier soft drink brands underneath Coke and Pepsi under one umbrella. And we decided to try to do that. And we had some very creative structures for acquiring Dr. Pepper and 7-Up and A&W and Country Time and Verner's and Squirt and so forth. And we created a very large soft drink group in a bizarre way. It'd be hard to diagram what we did, but we were doing things that other people had not done. I think this thirst to go into niches that have not been explored, do something somebody else hasn't done. You're probably going to fail, which is why they haven't done it, but just try it. And that's something that has always been with me. I recently was watching a master class, speaking of Toronto and Ontario, I was watching a master class given by the great Wayne Gretzky, the great one. And he had a saying that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And right. I believe that's a way to live your life. Take a shot. You probably will miss, but take a shot. Don't get on your final resting place and say, gee, I wish I had tried so-and-so. I wish I had tried photography. I wish I had tried writing. I wish I had gotten on the back of that motorcycle, not just watched it from the side of the road. And I believe, you might, if you only have one life to live, you might as well live as many lives as you can.
I love that so much. And I can relate to that thirst for creating stuff. Okay, so let's start talking about the custom bikes, because like you said, that really is, although I've never been to the museum, I've looked at a lot of pictures online, and your collection of customs is something that is definitely not available anywhere else. There's some stupendous items there. So talk to me about your process of either connecting with the builders, commissioning works, deciding what kind of a bike to build? Is that something that you do together? Do you give them free rein? What's your process?
Well, it's a great question because I think the process has changed with time. And I think it's changed with time for a number of reasons. Number one is our reputation as a commissioner or a builder, co-builder of custom projects has expanded. It's allowed more of the custom builders to come to us. But it started off with Max Hazen. And I didn't know this until after we had awarded Max a commission to build the twin musket. But he had been trying to sell a custom bike for over a year. He had turned to his wife-to-be and said, "I can't sell one, so I'm quitting as of Monday, and I'm going back to the construction industry." And on Tuesday, we called him because we had seen one of his bikes in the window of a clothing store in Malibu. Thought it was unbelievable. And I met with Max. We gave him a commission. That led to a total of 6 bikes with Max, 5 road bikes, if you will, and 1 racer that set a world record. With Craig Rodsmith, we've done 5 projects. And the first project, we met Craig at the Hand-Built show. And Craig was in a similar situation. Craig, he's the one who says this, he was dead broke. He had no money. He borrowed money to go to the Hand-Built show and to bring down a beautiful Moto Guzzi dustbin fairing custom bike called the Ambassador, which was just staggering.
Yeah.
And he was down to the point he had no food in his refrigerator. He was sharing cans of tuna fish with his cat, literally. And we saw this bike. I turned to Stacy. I only saw it on the left side. I said, "We're going to acquire that bike." And she said, "You don't know what's on the right side." I said, "I don't care what's on the right side. We're going to acquire that bike." And we met with Craig that night. It was 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And I said, "I'd like this for our museum." And that was the first of 5 projects with Craig. And as time went on, and I felt a little bit more comfortable with the workings of a motorcycle, the design of a motorcycle, I still barely know what a carburetor does. I know there's something with gas and air getting mixed together. I know there's a spark plug, and I know a piston goes up and down, but I don't know much else. But I had spent a lot of time in design with my National Geographic work. So I felt that I could bring that eye for the unusual, which Nat Geo emblazoned in your mind. Don't bring me back an image I've ever seen before. And I think that lends itself to the custom space, because by definition, a custom bike is unique. And we began to work with Max, with Craig, with Walt Siegel, with Shinya Kimura, with Kyo Kiyanaga, with Jay Donovan, with the list goes on, with Brian Fuller. And what I found is similar to what I found in finance, similar to what I found in photography. And that is, you may think of an industry as global, but when you go into a particular niche in that industry, there might be 10 or 12 players where if you connect with those 10 or 12 players, you're well connected. It's not everybody, but you're well connected. It's like 6 degrees of separation. And there are virtually no custom builders in the world who don't know who Max Hazen is, who don't know who Craig Rodsmith is, doesn't know who Walt Siegel is. And if they call up any of those people, or Shinya, or Keo, and or Michael LaFontaine, and say, "Hey, what's it like to work with Bobby? Is he a pain in the ass to work with, or is he a real partner? Does he give me free rein, etc.?" If you've been a responsible partner, you're going to get the right feedback. And very often with the custom builders, I know we did this with Shinya, we did it with a few other people, we did it with Max. We would go in and they would say to us, "What do you want to build?" And I would say, no, that's not the question. The question is, what do you want to build? Tell me, what is your dream bike? What is a bike that you've always had in the back of your mind? This is my dream of what I'd like a custom build to be. And let's talk about that. Now, maybe we'll sit down at the drafting table and we'll shape it a little bit, but let's talk about what is your dream bike, because I know if it's their dream bike, they will pour their passion into it because they're making their wish come true. And that certainly was true with Kyo Kiyanaga, who came to the museum and he had already built two racers, one with a Honda CB750 engine and the other with two CB750 engines. And he came in and he said, I want the three together. And I said, well, where's the third one? He said he had a drawing of it. And it was going to be a three-engine racer. The first one was called Cherry Blossom, the second one Gecko, and the third one Galaxy. And he said, I'd like you to commission me to build the third one. And I had done enough research to know that there had only been one racer in the last 50 years or so with three engines. And he had had this dream since he was a little boy. And we shook hands that day on a three-bike deal in a few hours.
Let's watch that clip. I got that clip. Can I roll it?
Oh, good. Please.
Here we go.
Kyo contacts us and tells us that he has a project and could he come to Dallas to chat with me.
Thank you for this great opportunity.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Kyo is a magnificent custom builder. He's a great mechanic. He's a great racer.
I want to show my past work. This is calling Cherry Blossom.
And this is the single engine.
Single engine.
Right. This is a beautiful bike.
Thank you. Next one is Gecko.
And that has two Honda CB750s. And the dream is to build a third one.
Yes.
Does the third motorcycle have a name? Is it Galaxy?
Galaxy.
Galaxy? Yeah. Okay.
This is the sketch. Same engine, CB750. 3 this time.
Three engines?
Yes.
Wow. Do you want to race this?
Of course.
Of course.
I want to race at the Bonneville 3 bike together.
So I think there's a lot of risk with Galaxy. Three engines. It's not been done for like 50 years, right?
I don't think so.
Since the 70s.
I don't think so.
No. That appeals to me. You know, let's try to do something nobody else has done. I would be honored to work with you on this. Honored. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do this.
Thank you very much.
This is my childhood dream.
Well, this is the place where dreams come true.
Bobby, I love that so much. I've seen it a number of times and I still like it. I remember when we talked a while back ago, when we first met and you shared the video with me. Right after seeing that, I had to send you an email to tell you how much that scene really got to me. I love it. That's fantastic. So clearly there is a tight relationship that develops between yourself and the builders. Now, let me take a little sidestep. I want to tell you something that
Sure.
I just cued in on as you were talking about Craig and the dustbin. So in 2016, I left a long-time career in finance, and I decided to pursue my passion, which was marketing and motorcycling and finding some intersection where I can combine that with culture and art and design.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to go down to the Hand-Built show in 2017. And I've been to other motorcycle shows before, but when I walked into that one, it was something like I've never seen before. And that's where I saw the dustbin. And
Wow.
that's where I saw Christian Sosa's
Space Traveler.
Space Traveler.
Right.
And gobsmacked, if that's the right word to use,
Love
like
that.
floored.
Right.
But isn't this amazing? You and I were in the same place at the same time, because I was there every day that the show was on, from the time it opened till the time it closed, because I just could not tear myself away from the environment and the art, really, the custom bikes that was there. So you and I were in the same space at the same time, and yet here we are now 4 years later.
That is
sharing
remarkable.
a story together. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. That is, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. There could be hundreds of thousands, millions of bikers, tens of millions of bikers in the world. There can be hundreds of thousands of custom builders, and yet when you connect with a network of a dozen or 2 dozen people, normally you're connecting to their networks as well, because this is a very well connected industry. And that is a remarkable coincidence.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the film, Leaving Tracks. The movie features a lot of the beautiful work done by some of these custom builders. But it's not about that. It's not about motorcycles. There's a big part of the movie is about the relationship and the bond that forms between yourself and the builders. And you touched on some of that with Craig and Max. And then there's also other components, which are you dealing with your own issues and trauma and hardships and health problems that you've had. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that, please.
Sure. After the way the film came about, I was never thirsting to make a documentary or a movie about anything, let alone about myself or the museum. But after a couple of years of the museum being open and it acquiring the level of prominence that it did and becoming known as the Hall of Fame of custom motorcycles, and very, very kind epithets that people would toss our way, we were approached by a handful of documentary filmmakers who said, you really need to make a documentary. You need to document how this museum went from bare earth to opening in April of 18. And in 2 years, you're world renowned. And in 2 years, you have the largest custom collection in the world. Nobody's ever done that before, let alone in 2 years. So we need to make a film about that, and it'll follow on your quote unquote success as a photographer with National Geographic, and it follows on with your achievements in the finance industry. So that's what we want to make a film about. And I said, frankly, I wouldn't go to see that movie because who wants to see a movie about success? You don't achieve things in life by going from one lily pad of success to another. You usually go through very troubled waters, and you alternate between trauma and triumph, or tragedy and triumph. And my life has had a lot of trauma in it, and it's had tragedy in it. And I've had a lot of setbacks. And I said, if you make a movie about only the high points, to me, it's a boring movie. And it's not one I'm interested in making. When we interviewed the 6th director who was interested, whose name is Nick Davis, and he has a great lineage in the industry. His grandfather, Mankiewicz, wrote with Orson Welles, wrote Citizen Kane, and his father is an Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. So it's in his blood. And Nick literally didn't know the front of a motorcycle from the back of a motorcycle, but he wanted to probe the life story. He and I shared long conversations about health problems I've been through, about some tragedy from my childhood, and some very deep personal traumas that I've been through. And he said, that's what we need to build into the film, because that's what creates the connective tissue between you and these builders. That's why you can understand why Craig Rodsmith only had cans of tuna fish in his refrigerator, because you left home when you were a young boy and you were like a street urchin, and you understand why Max was ready to give up on his career, and you had moments like that. And as the film goes into and Craig's made public, he contracted cancer in the middle of building The Killer, which is an odd name, but it was the name of the cycle we were building together. And I've been through many health crises myself. And Nick and I agreed to be co-producers, to be co-directors, and to build a narrative arc that took us through the life challenges that I've been through and wed them with the life challenges that the custom builders have been through, so that we see why there is this very tight personal connection between me and these builders. This is not a case, although I love the Medici example, this is not a case of Lorenzo de Medici gifting money to Michelangelo. This is a case of somebody who's been in the trenches and gotten dirty and muddy, working with people who are themselves in the trenches. And therefore, we can come out with life lessons here that apply to people, whether they or life experiences, which apply to people whether they know how a carburetor works or not. Yeah. And that was the film we wanted to make. And I think, at least so far, the reaction is it's resonating with people, not just Moto people, but non-Moto people.
Yeah. Bobby, we're 45 minutes into our discussion and time is flying by for me. Are you okay to go a little bit longer?
Sure. Whatever you'd like to do, guys.
Okay, thank you. So there was a scene in the movie where you talk about the relationship with your father, how it was troubled, and then I don't want to give too much away. And then there was some realization, and that transpired, that then totally flipped that relationship, that made you understand, I guess, his point of view and where he was coming from. And although I was fortunate enough to never have had that kind of a relationship with my parents, it did shed light into other people that I'm close with who have had those sort of tough relationships. And it was very relatable and explained a lot. And I don't know, it touched me that moment because it sort of helped to understand the other person and where they were coming from, and made me connect with that person in a more kinder way,
Right.
because of that understanding. So,
right.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much into detail in case somebody hasn't seen it yet. I want them to get that surprise. So you talked about some of the motivation behind the making of the movie, the telling of these human stories. And what were you trying to get out of the making of the movie and the sharing of these stories? And did it work out in the way that you thought that it would? Did you get what you wanted out of it?
Well, it's a great question. First of all, if the reason I was hoping to get something out of it was either money or fame, and it's not going to work out that way. I think whatever reputation or prominence I had is not being tainted by doing the movie. That was good enough. We're not going to taint the reputation by doing something in a half-assed way. And it's like the museum. It's not being done for money. That is not what I'm seeking to achieve in my artistic life or the artistic careers that I've pursued. And I said in the movie, and I've said many, many times, that I've had two phases of my professional life, one of which was as a financier. And when you're a financial executive or a finance professional, you're in it for the money. That's the whole point of being in that career. You're in it to gather money. And the primary, often the sole beneficiary of that is you. You can give the money away, you can share it with your family or whatever, but it comes to you. And in my artistic career, whether it's as a writer or as a photographer, as a curator, as a filmmaker, it's just the opposite. The whole point of doing that is to share your passion and share your work with as many people as possible, whether they pay to see it or not. You're basically trying to take experiences and passion and enjoyable things that you've done and spread it around, because not everybody can afford to get up in a helicopter and go over the Okavango Delta or go over the icebergs in Greenland, but they can see what you saw. And the same thing with a writer. They can read what you wrote. And the same thing with a film. They can watch what you've portrayed. And I think that in that sense, this is what this phase of my life is about. It's the purpose of the film is the same as the purpose of the museum. It's threefold. We want to educate people, we want to entertain people, and we want to inspire people. And if we've done that, then we've had the hat trick, if you will. It's 3 for 3. And I think, at least from the early critical reception, such as the one that you were kind enough to bestow upon us in the honor of being an official selection for the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival, the critical acclaim, the critical reception has been overwhelming. It has been well beyond anything we ever thought would be out there. And what's interesting is that the people who have given us feedback, film people such as yourself, experts who have come back to us, the compliments that people have been kind enough and gracious enough, such as yourself, to send our way are exactly what we were trying to achieve. When you just said the part in the film about the emotional trauma you went through with your father and then the eventual reconciliation, that's what got to me. Well, you didn't say what really got to me was this motorcycle in aisle 3 was really pretty. What you said is that the humanistic themes were what I related to. And we have had so many kind words said to us from people who are not moto aficionados, saying, this really changed my life in some sense. We've had a lot of people come back to me, people I know, people I don't know, who said, I had a very estranged relationship with my father or with my mother or with my parents. And seeing how you dealt with that and how you eventually were able to create a bridge back to them, even though they're not alive anymore, is something that I'm going to use in my life to make peace with my parents. Well, you've just changed somebody's life with a film. And what could be better than that? That's better than having a statue on the shelf. You changed somebody's life.
I agree with you. A lot of good stuff coming out of the movie and good experience in the production of the movie. Is there anything that happened that wasn't what you anticipated? Perhaps didn't come out as well, or some negative moments during the production of it?
I think during the course of producing my first film, this was my first trip to the bar, if you will. This was my first effort at being a filmmaker with Nick Davis side by side and shoulder to shoulder. There were many nights, and I'm saying nights 1, 2, 3 in the morning, I'd wake up and say, are we doing anything worthwhile here? Where is this thing going? And what's the point of this? And where is the theme? And where is the narrative arc? And where is the trail? Are we going nowhere? There were many nights like that, but I think every creative artist has moments like that. I certainly had moments with like that with my photography and with my writing. I think what really threw a ringer into our plans is when COVID arrived. And that was something we did not anticipate. We were near the end of principal photography, but we hadn't started the editing process. And we were planning for Craig and myself to race the sidecar we had built at Bonneville and El Mirage, and we could not do that. So how do we take one of the major threads of the film, and all of a sudden now it's truncated, it reached a dead end, literally, and do we build in COVID to the film, but how do we build it in without capitalizing on this human tragedy? And that certainly threw us for a loop. I also think that the difficulty of figuring out how to weave in the tragedy and the trauma from my family life in a way that was relevant to the film was something that was very, very challenging to do. Because again, I didn't want to capitalize on the fact that I've been through personal tragedy, personal crises. I didn't want to make that, if you will, a selling point of the film. So how do you build that into the film in a natural way that does not appear to be capitalizing on it? I think that was a artistic challenge, a filmmaking challenge. I think we eventually did it the right way by saving that for very near the end, because that's when the reconciliation occurred. That's when I understood how a certain tragedy that happened in our family had shattered my family, had shattered my father, had shattered my relationship with him. And it allowed me to say, you know, I'm not going to criticize him because I didn't walk in his shoes. I was 7 or 8 years old when that happened. He had to walk in those shoes. And later on in life, we did, near the end of his life, we did reconcile. But I didn't find peace in that relationship until after the filming was done, which was long after he had died, because I understood in the course of making the film what this tragedy had done to him as a man, as a brother of his brother, as a son of his father, as a father of the children in our family. I finally understood. I finally got it. And once I got it, as I say in the film, I'm finally at peace with loving that man. And that happened for me. So in some sense, I'm the biggest beneficiary of the filmmaking of all. What price do you put on understanding the tragedy and the trauma that you've gone through and allowing that to be a catalyst to reconcile with a parent who's no longer with you? I mean, that's priceless.
Yeah. I'm glad you had that opportunity to have that moment.
Thank you. And
okay.
I got through that without getting too choked up. I was close. There was a catch in my throat, but I made it through.
Okay. All right. I want to just give a little bit of a spoiler alert for anyone that's watching that hasn't seen the movie and the scene near the end that I'm about to talk about. If you want to tune out for a little bit and come back, or pause and come to this later, do that now. You've been warned. Okay, so in the movie, one of the things that definitely took me by surprise is when you decided to modify your will and give all the builders their bikes back once you pass away. How did that thought come about? Why did you decide to do that?
You know, it's a great question, but there is a fairly definitive answer, and it's the builders who are featured in the film. All of the builders who are featured in the film, who are the builders we did multiple projects with, I was close with personally. They agreed to be characters in the film. They were people I cared for very, very deeply. In some sense, many of us say, I love you when we finish emails and texts to each other, and we mean it. And the beginning of that thought process was when Stacy and I were out in California for a film sequence, and we were not one of the characters being filmed, but we were co-producing this scene. And one of the builders said on film, I don't know what I would do without Bobby in my life. I don't know what my life would be like were it not for Bobby. And I say that only because I walked out of there as if somebody had just punched me in the chest. It wasn't a sense of flattery. It was a sense of a burden, not that this person had placed a burden, but there was a responsibility. There was this responsibility. And I said, if the other builders feel this way, then they've gifted something to me. They've gifted to me. They may think I've gifted them something, but they've gifted to me the fact that I've affected their life. And as I talk to builders like Geo and his wife and partner, Kat, and they would talk about their custom bikes as if they were their children. They'd often say, I want you to take good care of my baby. And as Stacy and I had the responsibility for thinking through, okay, what happens to the museum? What happens to the collection if I pass away? And it's a subject that Stacy does not even like to talk about, but we have to talk about.
Of course.
And, I said, and this is in the film itself, I said, it's one thing if shortly after, a few years after I pass away, if you want to auction off the collection or whatever, that's one thing. But the custom bikes, particularly the characters in the film, that's something different. I mean, the thought of 3 of Max Hazen's bikes ending up in someone's garage, or the trio created by the Kiyonagas ending up in 3 different places, it just didn't feel right to me. And I thought the greatest gift that I can give to these folks, if they've entrusted me with their children, is to give their children back when I'm done. And to think of myself not as an owner, because I never used that phrase when I was dealing with the custom builders. I would say, we're partners on this, and I'm going to be the custodian of the bike, but it's our bike. And I thought, well, what do custodians do? They take custody of something, and then when you're done, it's sort of like being summer camp. You take care of the children at summer camp, but at the end of summer camp, you give the children back to the parents. And I thought, that's the right thing to do with these bikes. And if a builder wants to keep them, he can keep them. If the builder, or she, if they want to sell them, they can sell them. If they want to lend them to another museum, they can. But give the power to make the decision back to the builders, because they're not going to do me any good when I'm not here anymore. And it's actually not a significant impact on my estate to take these wonderful builders and their collection pieces and say, why don't you take them back, and then you decide, you own your children again. You decide what their destiny is. And once I hit upon this, I discussed it with my financial advisors. I discussed it with Stacy. Everybody said, yes, let's do that. And a number of people who have interviewed me have said, we've interviewed a lot of collectors and a lot of museum owners. We don't know a single one who's ever done that. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, this is good, because it's forging new ground. And I think it's a good example for people who have collections where you've commissioned an artist. It's one thing if you buy a Van Gogh. You can't do anything for Vincent. He's not here anymore. But if you commission an artist and then you take possession of their work and you act as a prism for that work to be seen by a lot of people, well, when you're not around anymore, it may have appreciated a value, maybe it didn't. if the builder or the artist still is, why don't you give them the opportunity to decide what to do with it? If it has monetary value and they want to sell it, that's their business. And we ended up doing that for all of the custom builders who appear in the film, and we may expand that in the future to others.
Well, it was quite a moment in the film. Like I said, it was surprising, an emotional moment for sure. I don't know.
We got 12 or 13 custom builders crying all at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I like the idea that it's now up to them to decide what happens next. I can appreciate that. But I'm also going to speak a little bit selfishly and say, I hope that doesn't mean that their wonderful creations will be locked away in somebody's private collection or private garage. Like, these are, for folks that haven't seen these motorcycles, these are not just bicycles. These are absolutely, truly works of art. And I wouldn't want them to be locked away somewhere. I want them to be somewhere where they're easily accessible for generations to look at and enjoy that beauty. So there was that part of me that when this moment happened in the film, I thought, oh, gee, I really hope that that's not what's going to happen, is that these bikes are locked away.
I think that many of the builders now have a taste of the reward of seeing their film viewed by thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of people, because we'll do Instagram posts with these, and tens of thousands of people will see the bikes, and the articles are written by different journals. I think a lot of the builders have had a taste now, all the way back to Max and Craig and Walt and others, that the exposure of their work to a very broad audience is a huge reward that they didn't bank on when they started doing custom bikes, because a lot of them did custom bikes with the notion that success is when you build a custom bike and you sell it to one person, not when it gets exposed to thousands of people. So I suspect that your preference for these custom beauties, these masterpieces, to be seen by thousands or tens of thousands of people, even after I'm gone, is very likely to come to fruition.
I hope so. We have a question here from Steve again that says, how many bikes do you envision being the right number for the museum?
It's a good question.
I'm going to answer it for you. Is it N+1?
Yeah, it's always one more. Yeah. It's like when I was a lawyer 150 years ago, and the SEC would be looking at your materials, and the answer to the question was, how many more questions do you have? And they always said just one more, but it was always just one more, just one more. I don't think that there is an absolute right number. In one sense, it's when you run out of space. But one of the things we pride ourselves on is the fact that we have 230 bikes in about 23,000 square feet of display or exhibit space, which is 100 square feet per bike. So there's a lot of room. There's a lot of space. You can see any of our bikes from 360 degrees by walking around the platform that the bike is on. And I think our window for acquisition at this point and for commission is narrower and narrower, because we don't want to be extremely crowded. I've walked into museums where the pieces are crammed together so tightly. It's like the parking lot of a biker hangout. And that's not the way a museum should be. I don't know what the ideal number is, but it's not 400. And we've never sold a bike. That's the other thing. We've acquired 230 bikes. We've commissioned I don't know how many, and we've never sold one. So it may be that at some point in the future, we say, well, if we want to continue our expansion of the custom collection, maybe what we do is we sell some of our vintage bikes to make room for some more custom bikes. But we're not at that point. And I think part of the reason for that is that the filmmaking path is much broader than we thought originally. And it looks like it may lead to further projects. So there's just so much. We have a very small staff. We only have 6 people that run this whole show. So.
Wow. Okay, we are over the hour, so I'm going to start to wrap it up, maybe just with this one last question, which is, what's next for Bobby Haas?
Yeah, that's always the question you ask yourself whenever you finish one project. Because particularly if you've done sequential projects in your life, or whether it's deals in the deal business or projects with National Geographic, as you're finishing up one project, that thirst, that passion to create is not, your thirst is not satisfied. And at first I thought that the film Leaving Tracks was a one and done. We're going to make one film, that's it. It'll tell the story of the museum and how the builders and Stacy and I came together. But the reception to the film has been so strong in terms of the original reasons we did it, and that is weaving together humanistic themes with a motorcycle background or landscape, that we're actually thinking about another project, and people have come to us now with ideas for another project. So I would not be surprised if what is next for us is another film at some point.
Wow, okay. Well, if it's sort of motorcycle related,
it will be.
One avenue right here.
It will be, I promise you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm sure we could go on. I know I have some more questions and would love the opportunity to talk to you some more, but I thank you for your time. And thank you for sharing your film and your story with us.
It's my great pleasure to share with you and your audience. And let me just say once again, it's an absolute honor to be part of TMFF, the festival, this broadcast. And you reached out to us before anybody else reached out to us. And there's no substitute for being first. You will always be first to have done so. And I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I said that to you in an email, that you're now a member of the TMFF family, and that is true. And I look forward to meeting you in person. If not in Toronto, you can count on a trip down to Dallas. I cannot wait to come and meet you in person and see the museum, of course.
It will be our honor, our pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All the very best, Bobby. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You too.